Okay, so you should see my screen now on the RSS feed. Of course, there's those little paragraphs in front of you, and you should be seeing one soon about the free training webinars for next month in November. In case you haven't joined one of our webinars before, I want to quickly explain how it works. All of you can hear me, or at least I hope you can, but I can't hear you talking. So if you have a question, there is a question entry field in the GoToWebinar software, which should be up on the screen in front of you. Because there are so many people on the call, I'm going to keep an eye on those questions. So if you ask one in the middle of the class, I might be able to work it in, depending if it fits with the content I need to cover. If not, I always check the questions, and I'll email you and get in touch with you after class, and we'll answer your question. So that's really the format of the webinars. So where we're going to start today is in Chronicles Labor Manager. That's where most of our labor tools are brought together. On your homepage, you should see that on the left under Management Tools, Marketing Manager should be there. If it's not there, just a really quick note, you'll be able to add it by clicking the Edit Tools button, and that will be one of the options that you can add. The big picture of the importance of tracking labor, and that's important part of the discussion. Do you currently track labor through Chronicle? If yes, maybe you're looking for some tips on how to do it better. If you're not currently using it, you want to get more out of Chronicle and see what that has to offer you. We're going to show you some of that today. And the big picture of that really depends on how you do labor in your company, and everyone's case is different. If you don't have your in-house crews, your own staff that you're paying to go out to jobs, then tracking labor through Chronicle may not be as relevant for you. If you just pay subcontractors, then you're going to put that into QuickBooks or your other accounting software to pay them for that. But as the labor records don't sync back and forth between QuickBooks, at least currently, what we have provided for you are a bunch of timesheet and labor reports that link with Chronicle's calendar and a whole bunch of other things to help you keep track of the biggest cost of doing a job, which is paying your staff. So I'm going to open the Marketing Manager now. This is a huge piece of the job profitability, which is a separate class, a separate discussion, but of course, as I just said, because labor costs are such a huge piece of making sure your jobs are profitable, then if you want to use the job profitability features through Chronicle, you also need to be able to be using Chronicle's labor features to track any labor costs for your own staff when they work on a job. Okay? So there are several reports in the Marketing Manager, and I'm going to try and cover them. I'm sorry, this is the Marketing Manager. I need to look at Labor Manager. I'm going to be covering these reports in sort of a logical order, so you can see how it is, starting first with setting up labor to make sure it works well for your company. So where you would need to start with that is on the far right, the Employee HR and Pay Rates tab. The very first thing we need to give Chronicle to make sure that you can use the labor features would be a pay rate per employee. So if you have any staff member that would ever go out and do work on a job, you need to enter an hourly pay rate for them. And you're going to see that in the rate column. You can see some of the employees in my list have hourly pay rates assigned and some don't. So anyone that has a pay rate of 0 is not going to show up on my timesheet, and the timesheet's where I would enter labor hours for them. Chronicle needs an hourly rate for every person, of course, because its purpose is to calculate, well, how much did it cost me to send Anthony out to a job? Well, $20 an hour. If he was there for 2 hours, then that is the $40 labor cost. So you want to make sure you get all these entered in. Without the hourly rates, Chronicle can't do the labor cost calculation. If you have a salaried employee, they're technically salaried, that's how they get paid, but if they ever go out to a job, I still recommend doing the math and giving them an hourly equivalent so that Chronicle can incorporate that labor cost into the total job costing. The way you would change the rate, if you have the security clearance to do so, not everyone does, is a simple double click, and you can change the rate as you need to. Notice that Lizzie Dunlap does not have an hourly pay rate. I'm going to quickly switch to my Labor Detail and Entry tab and to the Add New page. So this is basically your timesheet entry. Notice the employees on the left are less than the, these are not all the employees that we saw on the other tab. The reason for that is because any employee with a pay rate of 0 is not going to show up here. So if you are trying to do this and you're trying to enter pay rate, labor for someone, and you're here saying, well, they're not here, how can I enter labor for them? It's probably because they don't have a pay rate assigned, and you'd need to first go back to employee and pay rates, assign them $1 an hour wage, return to your timesheet, and notice Lizzie Dunlap's now showing as an option. And I can say, oh, she spent 2 hours working on this or that, and it will track it for me. But the pay rate is absolutely the first step. And we're going to get into how do I enter labor for the right job and all of that in a few minutes. But first, we really need to finish our setup. We don't want to start entering labor full force until we've made sure the setup is right. So next step is to go, once we've done all of our labor hours, and you can spend time on the other things on this page if you want to, Social Security number, birth date, but that's more for human resources information. It's not required for the labor features to work. That's just if you want a convenient place to store that information. Our next step is to go to the Labor Setup tab. And this is where Chronicle really gets into the nitty-gritty of how the labor is constructed, and you can customize it to fit your business. Okay? So we have 3 tabs on the left, the overtime and double time rates. That's what we would be customizing here. Next, we'll look at how to customize how you pay people on weekends and holidays. And after that, we would look at how you pay, which specific activities you pay people for. Obviously, there are some things we track in our company that we're going to pay people for, like going and cleaning the carpet somewhere, and other things that we're not going to track on the timesheet, like I made a phone call to the adjuster. We're not going to necessarily enter that on the timesheet. So we'll just set up which things qualify and which things don't on that Labor Activities tab. So overtime and double time. People handle this differently. The new labor features you're seeing here, we've increased the level of customizability. The first thing you need to set is where or which day does our payroll work week begin on. And that can differ from company to company. So pick the right day for you. Then in this grid here, we're seeing you're going to tell Chronicle how it should react to daily overtime and daily double time, if any, and then weekly overtime and weekly double time, if any. Right now, my setup on this Chronicle you see in front of you, it says that after 8 hours a day, overtime automatically kicks in. I could say there's no daily overtime. It's just what I've now said is I don't pay daily overtime. It's now whenever they cross that 40 hours a week, that's when overtime kicks in. So make sure you change that to fit you. Then you see these in the center of the screen, all these little check boxes. And you want to make sure you look at each one and see if you should check it or not check it. And you can always get help from us if you have specific questions about any of those. But what it's saying is, in a specific situation, can an employee do this? And here are some examples. This first column, users may force pay rate to overtime rate. That one is checked. That means if I'm entering labor, and let me see if I can pull some. So I have a labor record up in front of me, and I'm looking at this one for Joe Cerruti, and I say this one should actually be overtime. Notice on the right-click menu, I can force that to the overtime rate, that particular labor entry. That is an option on the right-click menu only because in the labor setup, we checked that and said that that is an option we want to give people. Okay? Same thing if you want to allow people to force things to double time or exempt things from overtime. You can check those. It gives you greater control. That's what it does. So if you're looking at the labor for the week and you're saying, well, Chronicle thinks that the overtime happened at the end of the week, because that's when this employee actually crossed the 40 hours a week. But the overtime really was incurred by this other job, so I'm going to force that one record to be overtime so that the job costing on the job is actually more accurate. Okay, hopefully that makes sense to folks. So take a look at those settings, make sure they fit your company well, and let us know if you have questions about those. They deal with things like prevailing wage. You know, if you're dealing with union rates that you have to pay, we've incorporated accommodations for those kinds of situations. At the bottom of the screen, we're dealing with a special pay rate situation. Sometimes you might need to force a particular labor record to pay an employee a different rate. Maybe on biohazard jobs only, you pay them a higher hourly rate. If that's the case, we could go back to, here's our labor entries again. I could say, oh, this one for Anthony Eckert, 2 hours. This isn't actually a biohazard job, but just for the sake of the example, let's say it was. I could right-click and say, force this to the biohazard tech pay rate, because that's actually what he was doing. Notice then in the special payment options column on the right, it's now saying that he's actually getting paid the biohazard tech pay for that record. Actually, 2 people there with that. So that allows you, again, more control, making sure people are getting paid what they should be getting paid. Okay, so let's move on. Hopefully that was helpful. Weekend and holiday rates. So we're trying to also help make accommodations for the fact that if someone works a weekend, some people like to give them, you know, always give them time and a half on weekends or a double time. Or if they work Christmas or Thanksgiving, a lot of folks are going to pay extra to have someone do that. So here you can say, always if someone works a Saturday, I want that to be overtime. If someone works a Sunday, I want that to be double time. And for holidays, we should have them be paid double time rate in this example. And then you can say in the list on the right what qualifies as a holiday. By default, we've entered New Year's Day for you, and we've also entered Christmas. You can add holidays beyond this, for example, and then they would also qualify to get that double time rate. Labor activities. This is something you absolutely need to go through when you're setting up Chronicle to use labor, because at the top of the screen you have a list of all of your departments. And let's take water damage, for example. On the left, you see all the various things that you might do on a water job. However, not all of these are things that you're going to want to enter on the timesheet. So if someone spends 10 minutes calling the agent, I know they're going to enter those 10 minutes on their timesheet to get paid for that. It's usually done by an administrative person who's paid differently, so we're not going to log that on a particular job's costing. So we're going to set that one to no. We don't want to have that show up on the labor timesheet. However, things we do want to have show up in the labor timesheet are like carpet cleaning, emergency water service, monitoring, yes. But I'm not going to put it on the timesheet that someone spent 5 minutes uploading the estimate. So those are set to no. And the way you change those settings is a simple double click to toggle that. So you'd want to go through and check all of your departments and make sure that those settings were correct. There are some other departments that you would want to check that are more human resources geared, in particular the human resources department. This is where we say, well, Elizabeth, there are you know, other things I pay people for, not just work on a job. You know, someone might be out sick or on vacation, or I want to track their hours of unpaid leave. And we absolutely have made a way for you to do that with Chronicle. What you see in front of you, we have an activity of sick time. And sick time doesn't count toward overtime, but you can enter labor for it. So if they're out for a sick day, it doesn't count towards their 40 hours a week of overtime, but we are tracking it and we are going to pay them for it. Unpaid leave, It is tracked, we are tracking it, but it is unpaid. So that allows you to use this sick and vacation time tool that you'd be able to track any employee-related hours, whether paid or unpaid, whether they count towards overtime or whether it doesn't. And you can see for each of the employees in a certain date range how much sick time they've used and how much holidays, how many holidays they've been paid for and how much vacation they have left, so that you can, it really does more than just your job costing. We're really helping you manage your employees and all of the labor side of things. Okay? So that's really useful. I encourage people to take a look at that. There are actually some other things you might pay people for, like shop time, or I was in a meeting. Again, that's not, I wasn't working on a specific job necessarily. I was cleaning the shop because things were slow. But you're still going to pay someone for that. So often I have people put activities in the administration department, like equipment cleaning and repair, and we want to be able to enter labor for that. We want to be able to enter labor for an office meeting or shop time. So they can say they were in, shop time for 2 hours, and we're going to pay them normally for that. Okay. So the next thing I want to focus on is, now that we've set up our labor and how it's going to work, before we start using it, often the next thing people are really concerned about is, before I start plugging in employee pay rates and actually tracking my labor with this, I want to make sure the right people can see the information, and people who don't need to see it won't be able to. So I'm going to minimize my labor manager for a few minutes, and we're going to jump into the main system setup. That's where all the security settings are kept. If you're not familiar with Chronicle or the main system setup, that's okay. You may not need to change these, but I want to make you aware of what they are and where they are in case you do want to take a look at them. So inside the main system setup, there are tabs across the left. I'm going to go to the security tab. The first tab here shows me all of the employees, or all the people in my Chronicle currently listed as employees, and their current level of security. You'll see a chart to the right. It goes from 0 to 7. That is 0 being the lowest level of access, which is no access at all, and 7 being the highest. And so it progresses upward. With each increased level, they have more access to the program. What each level can do is the next tab across the top, and that's actually where I want to go with this. So here it's listing pretty much all of the different places. We call them security contexts or security checkpoints. These are all of the different places across Chronicle where Chronicle is going to check the user's security access to the minimum security clearance to do or see that particular thing. And some of these security checkpoints are relevant to our labor discussion. I'm going to scroll down until I find those. Here's one. So labor entry delete, that's saying how much security clearance do I have to have right now to delete a labor entry. You can see to the right now you have to be in this Chronicle, which is a test Chronicle, but right now I would have to be at least a level 6 or higher to delete a labor entry. Any lower than that, even if I could see it, it wouldn't let me delete it. I could change that if I wanted to and decrease that to a 5 if I had an office manager who was a 5, and I didn't really care if my 5 did this, that I could decrease that requirement. My other option would be to take my office manager and make them a 6 so that they could delete labor entries, but the rest of my level 5 employees could not. So I encourage you to take a look at that and really take it on a case-by-case basis. My third option would be to give my office manager an exception to the rule and say you have to be at least a level 6 to do this unless you're Anthony. That would be another option. Give somebody an exception to the rule. Okay, another security checkpoint relevant to this discussion is labor entry edit. Again, I have to be at least a level 6 to edit a labor entry. To enter labor for someone that's not me, I have to be at least a level 5. To enter it for myself, I have to be a level 5. I could decrease that to a 3 if I wanted most staff to be able to enter their own labor. Labor reports view, I'm going to change that one, say, to a 5. What labor reports view does is that says when you go to look at labor reports or job costing reports, you'll be able to see the hours. We'd be able to see that that there were 2 hours, labor hours spent on putting up drywall and 4 hours cleaning the carpets, but I wouldn't necessarily see the cost of that. So we'd see the labor-related stuff, but not necessarily the job costing or the pay rates. If you're talking, we need to be able to see, well, Johnny is paid $15 an hour, then that would be our, where is it? Payroll view. Payroll view means I can see how much someone is paid per hour, and I can see the job costing numbers in the report. However, payroll view doesn't allow you to change what somebody is paid. If you need to change that, you would need also to meet the security clearance for pay rate change. Right now, that's set to a 7, which is the highest, which means only the highest users in Chronicle could change someone's pay rate information. And I'd say that's pretty normal, and I'd recommend that security setting for this particular security context. The other one I would comment on is personal info view. So that is the one that controls who can see those personal employee details that we saw a few minutes ago, like social security number and marital status and driver's license number. You have to meet this security checkpoint, personal info view, in order to see those details. There's one other, I'm going to scroll up to it, labor setup. In order to go to the tab we were on a few minutes ago, let me bring that back up. In order to come to this labor setup tab, what that was saying is you have to be at least a level 6. So a lower level employee might be able to come into the labor manager and enter labor and update labor or do some other things, but they wouldn't be able to change the way your labor is configured. That's an additional layer of security for you. They wouldn't be able to change the way your labor is configured unless they met this security clearance. So they'd have to meet that. Even if they could see all the other things, configuring how it works is a totally different thing. So you want to check that one as well. All right, so that's my discussion on security. If anyone has more specific questions on that, maybe instances particular to your business, you can always enter something into the questions box and I can get back to you after class. I often find that's a big one for folks. Okay, now I want to spend a few minutes talking about how to add labor. There are 2 ways to do it, both of which are going to take place on the Labor Detail and Entry tab, which is the first tab in our Labor Manager. The first way is called Manual Labor Entry. Sounds hard, but it's not actually that hard. You would come in here to this tab and click the Add New button. You saw me do this a few minutes ago. And then you might have paper timesheets in front of you, and you would just be entering that into the computer. Say we had in front of us that Joe worked on the Marcoulis job, or let's see, okay, job number 6, and he spent 2 hours working on this and an hour driving the carpets out there. And if I want to post that so I can go see it on the job file, I would say post and close. Now I could actually pull the labor for the last few days here. Let me go to a broad date range to make sure I get everything. We can see all the labor that's been entered recently. And here we see there are the two entries we put in today. Now, as I talked about before, there's always the right-click menu. You can make changes. I could delete that if it was wrong. I can edit this. So Deleting, you can right-click and delete something. If it's not right, even after you've posted it, you could come in and say, actually, that was supposed to be 3 hours. And notice the cost changing as I do that. A special payment option, if this is supposed to be a special pay rate or forced to overtime, the pink indicates it's an overtime record. So this is where even after you've entered labor, you can delete and edit and update. Okay? So adding from here is the manual way. I just showed you how to manually enter a labor record for a job. If you need to manually enter labor that is not related to a job, say they were on vacation, I would say not job related. For Anthony, pick the Human Resources Department, and he was on vacation for 8 hours, and that was yesterday, and post and close. Now if I go to sick and vacation time, notice 1 total day of paid leave just showed up for Anthony. So remember I told you that this sick and vacation time tracker was going to be watching for those to be entered, and it is. So it really helps me know when I can say, sure, take off those 2 days you wanted, or, well, doesn't look like you have the time off, can we work something out, to help keep track of that really easily. Because you're already entering the labor in order for your job costing reports to work. So you'll have that information just as a result of doing what you need to do. Okay, so that's the way to manually enter labor, both both for a job and both for other things like human resources events. The second way to enter labor is to import it off the calendar. Now let me see if there's actually anything on the calendar for this job. Let me push the date range out. Yes, there's actually a lot on the calendar. So if you are already using Chronicle's calendar to enter, your schedules for all your employees, so you know where they're going and what jobs they're going to, and the calendar is a separate discussion, but I'll minimize this. Let me show you an event on the calendar that it would import. Just really quickly, even though we're not covering the calendar today. I'm going to look at my water tech group, I think. And I go back to a month. I think I have something, yes. So see, this week I have some events on the calendar for the employees. Joe Cerruti, 9 to 2 o'clock on the 17th. I scheduled that for him. He and Anthony are both going to that apparently. If I go back to my labor manager, notice that when I push the date range out, here is actually, that event is actually showing up here for Joe Cerruti. So 10/17, that was actually it, Joe Cerruti, 7 hours on that particular job. So imported that off the calendar. So in the import tool, I can see that. I've actually already imported that. That's why it's showing up there. But you can look at all the records on the calendar. I'm going to decrease that so it's a little easier to look at, so we'll have less events. Notice here's a non-job related event that it was importing. So it will import sick days off the calendar. It will import job-related work off the calendar, and you can edit it at this point. So if it's not right before you post it, you can alter it, update it, make sure that it's correct. So schedule things on the calendar the way you normally would. You can update them on the calendar if something changes. Say someone didn't stay out as long as maybe you thought they would need to and they came back early. You can fix it on the calendar, or you could just import it and fix it when you actually get it in here. Once you have it all right, then you would say on the bottom right, import and close when you're done. And you can import on different conditions. I'm doing labor for everyone. I could say I just want to see the labor I can import for Joe Cerruti or for Lizzie Dunlap. And because as you saw, it can get to be a pretty large list. That can be pretty intimidating or hard to filter through. Maybe you want to import the labor of one employee at a time and complete And that's how you're going to do their time entry. That makes it a lot simpler. You also could import labor and filter it by a particular department. I want to see all the water damage related labor as I am importing it. Maybe I'm the water damage manager and I just care about looking at that. Really depends on what your focus is, but we have a lot of filters, a lot of tools to help you focus in on what you need to focus in on, and you can update it if you need to change it, either by changing the start or end time or changing the overall hours. Okay, so that's the import screen. After I've imported it, then this labor detail and entry tab, this is the screen that shows you the labor records that have been entered, whether they were manually typed in or they were imported off the calendar. Anything that has been posted, either recently or way into the past, it will all show up here and I can filter through it. So here I'm seeing labor for everyone for a specific date range. Let me change it to this week so it's a much smaller list. And then I could filter it further by a lot of conditions you can see at the top of the screen. I either want to look at, just job-related labor or not job-related labor, like this vacation entry, just job stuff, or everything. That's one thing I can change. And we can also ask it to display different columns. Maybe in this report I want to see the start time, or I want to see who entered the labor, or I want separate overtime and double time columns. So you can customize this a lot. And this report can be exported to Excel. Notice there is an Export to Excel button in the upper right-hand corner. So any of these, you can just drop them out to Excel if you need to. So this report's pretty useful for finding out what labor has been entered. If you need help paying people, you can use the summary reports, because this limits out. It doesn't show you, well, Joe was working on cleaning carpets. Doesn't show you Anthony was on a sick day. This shows you who it was, what their hours were, and what their costs were. This is the report I would give to your accountant to plug into QuickBooks or whatever other payroll program you might use. And I can summarize this. Notice upper left-hand corner, I'm summarizing this by employee. I could say, show me this employee broken out by department. I could see, employees in a certain division. I don't know if I have divisions here. Or all labor posted for what activities. You could break it out this way if you wanted to. This is the most common view for this. And you can pick the date range and a variety of other things. But this really allows you to focus on what do I need to pay this person. Okay, one more report I want to quickly show you in this tab, in this report, which is the overtime evaluator. Like sick and vacation time, Chronicle is tracking any overtime incurred by each employee. So we can see in the current week on the left how many overtime or double time hours being incurred by Joe Cerruti. So you can see that he has 37 hours left before he hits weekly overtime. This one aspect of this, it's helpful because if you are getting to the end of the week and you might want to send the employee out to a job that's not going to cross over into a lot of overtime. Maybe there's someone who hasn't fulfilled all their hours for the week that you could send. So gives you some more control over how to set up your crews and teams when you're sending them out to the field. To the right, it's showing you overtime and double time details for the past quarter. So if there are trends in certain employees with incurring a lot of overtime, you'd be able to see that. You wouldn't have to wonder about that. You wouldn't have to spend weeks crunching numbers to see if you could answer that question, because it's tracking it automatically. You just have to look at the tab. So Chronicle's labor features, if you do have your own employees you send out to jobs and you want to be able to use the job costing and profitability features in Chronicle, you need to do the setup of the labor features. You need to be entering labor on all employees who go out to a job, any job-related labor, and I encourage you to also use the features to allow you to track administrative and HR-related things like sick time and overtime, because there are advantages to you with the ease of the reports if you do so. So we really help you to track labor and manage overtime and manage human resources time. Try and make that easy for you. Other reports that are available to you, other places where labor hours show up. I'm going to close the Labor Manager. I'm actually going to pop into the Job Manager for a minute. And I'm going to go to the Job Financial tab. We're not focusing on the Job Manager today or financials today, but what I want to show you is that if you are analyzing financials, as I said in the beginning, labor numbers are a huge, huge part of that. And let me see if I can get more numbers here. So it doesn't look like we're seeing, okay, there we're seeing some labor cost numbers. So this particular Chronicle I'm using is not linked to QuickBooks, so I'm not going to be seeing sub or materials numbers because those come from QuickBooks. I'm not going to be seeing invoice amounts because those cross over from QuickBooks as well. And it's a combination of the invoice, tax, sub-material expense information from QuickBooks combined with Chronicle's labor numbers that actually give you your gross profit percentage, which is that last column on the right. That gross profit percentage or number is what we're after to know how profitable our jobs are. And the labor is half of that. We have to be able to get those labor costs in there for that number to be accurate. So this is the place, once you have the financials going and once you have the labor in place, you can come and all these conditions at the top of the screen allow you to do job profitability and analysis on those jobs. And this is where a place where those labor cost numbers would be showing up. Okay, so that's one reason it's relevant to do it. Because if you want the job profitability functionality, you also have to be doing the labor piece. If you're not, if you're paying your own crews, you need to be doing the labor piece for that to work. So this is a whole bunch of jobs. We're looking at labor costs for all kinds of jobs on one screen. One place where you can look at the job costing and the labor numbers for a job is, say you're on the Jobs tab. You could simply right-click that particular job and go to the Accounting Job Costing screen. Now you can see on this job, on the right, we have hourly labor, $125 of regular labor. So this is the numbers for just one job, whereas in the Job Manager Financial Report, we were looking at the numbers for a whole bunch of jobs at a time. So that's how you look at one job, or you could be looking at a bunch of jobs at one time. Okay, so that's really, we're getting close to the end, so that's really what I had to cover, but I do want to remind you that if you need more help, one good place to go for that is our help screen. If you don't know where to find that, upper right-hand corner is the small blue circle with a question mark in it. On the Training Videos tab, these are free. If you don't know about these, I really, really encourage you to take a look at them. We have a bunch on the labor features, which go into more depth about what I was just talking about. Double-click on labor videos, and this menu pops up. I think there are 13 labor-specific videos. There's even one, if you were curious about prevailing in union wages and how to deal with that, there's a video on that. There's a video on the security settings, so if you want to watch that for a reminder, I encourage you to do that. If you need help or if someone wasn't able to come to our labor webinars this month, this is a great resource for you. I encourage you to check these out. They're usually about 5 to 10 minutes in length, not usually any longer than that. So I encourage you to take a look at that. And we also have a new video on the collections features. So that just came out, so we're going to be talking about that next month. So if you're curious about that, though, you can get a jump start on it by watching the video. As always, if you have questions, please submit them to me either through GoToMeeting, the GoToWebinar interface, or you can email me at webinar@gochronicle.com. So that's webinar@gochronicle.com, and I'd be more than happy to email with you or give you a call. Just reach out to me. We're here to help. We love being here to answer your questions. So let me know what you think. I hope this was useful for you today, and I hope to see you at other webinars in the future. Have a great week.